Recording in progress. Recording stopped.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We are here welcoming our guest. Actually, not guest, because in our culture we said 3 days guest. Then you will be owning the house, one of our family. So Ibu Prof Najma, we called guest, but she's not guest. She's one of us. According on her participate, she appears at our conferences. Last year we meet online before she comes due to the pandemic. She's today among us. We are glad to have her between us. Inshallah, we will share with us her knowledge, her experience about, I think, especially about the Sheikh Yusuf. She has a lot wrote about the Sheikh Yusuf. He's one of the Sufism person, hero Sufism into countries here in our beloved country Indonesia than in Africa. We give her the mic to her, give her time. So, Prof, the time is yours. As usual.
Okay. Tired. And now I can tired, so I
Recording in progress.
can you all hear me? I just would like to thank
Recording stopped.
I would like to thank the organizing committee in
Recording in progress.
inviting professors and committee members, Tawfiq Matar, inshallah, here, and I really appreciate it. it was a very special time for me to be in Makassar because, as you may have heard from the last time I've spoken, I wrote a book on Sheikh Yusuf of Makassar and his stay at the Cape, South Africa. So when I wrote the book, I have not in my imagination only of his place of birth in Makassar, Goa, and now I can say I know these places. Today, I just want to talk about something beyond my book, which is not in my book, some more information that I worked with after the book was published. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history or the story of Sheikh Yusuf through the pen of a Reverend Francois Valentine, Francois Valentine. I will tell you a bit about him. So what I will do now is three people I talk about in my book is Sheikh Yusuf of Makassar, the Raja of Tambora, and Reverend Francois Valentine. So who was Francois Valentine? He was a Dutch priest in the employ of the VOC. You all know the VOC, right? So where I'm staying, in South Africa, in Cape Town, it is the tip of Africa, right at the bottom of Africa. But it was also a VOC refreshment station. So the ships would come from Holland, stop at the Cape, and come to Indonesia, which was the East Indies, right? So the Dutch East Indies. So Francois Valentine was employed by the Dutch to preach Christianity to the Indonesians in Indonesia. So on one of his visits, he had 2 visits past the Cape, to and from, actually 4 visits. He had stopped at the Cape to meet another Reverend, Kelden, and this Reverend was a neighbor of Sheikh Yusuf in the Cape. I'll explain a bit about you. I just wanted to tell you who the Reverend was. So Sheikh Yusuf, we see was, you all know who Sheikh Yusuf was, but I'll just tell you a little bit in a chronological timeline. Sheikh Yusuf was a young man. As a young man, age 17 or 18, he left Makassar and he went to study abroad further. Okay, so he traveled to many countries, including Makkah, where he also studied. He became a Hafiz of the Quran, he was a Haji, he was a Sufi saint of many tariqas, and later he was also the author of many books. So he was a very learned scholar, right? But when he returned after 20 years of study, he could not come back to Goa in Makassar because the Dutch had taken over. So he then could not return there. And we know just a little bit of quick story. Sheikh Yusuf then became a resistance fighter, and the Dutch outfoxed him and outmaneuvered him and captured Sheikh Yusuf. He was then taken from Indonesia and sent to Sri Lanka, where he stayed for 10 years. And then there was what we call a letter that was written by Sheikh Yusuf. We found this letter, one of the researchers found the letter about 5-7 years ago, in which it's a Dutch translation of a letter that Sheikh Yusuf had written, in which he said, I'm an old man now, I'm tired, my feet are sore, I want to come to Indonesia, back to Indonesia and die in Indonesia. That is what his wish was. And in the letter, Sheikh Yusuf apologized to the Dutch and he admitted his guilt and all kinds of things. But we don't know if this was a translation of a letter that Sheikh Yusuf wrote. So it is very uncharacteristic of Sheikh Yusuf to apologize to the Dutch after being in exile for so long. But let's accept it was his letter, right? So what happened was the Dutch did not accept his apology, they did not grant his wish, and they sent him further away from Sri Lanka to Cape Town. So where he stayed for another 5 years, and then Sheikh Yusuf died at the Cape and was buried at the Cape. So in Cape Town, we have a place called Makassar, named after Makassar in Makassar here, and where Sheikh Yusuf, when he died, he was also buried in Makassar. So we also have a kramat for Sheikh Yusuf in Makassar. So Sheikh Yusuf wasn't the first political exile to the Cape. But when he came to the Cape, he came with 49 people, which was his generals, their wives, his children. They were sons and daughters, and he had slaves, and a total of 49 people with him when he came to the Cape. And that was in when he was exiled to the Cape. He came here, and 3 years after Sheikh Yusuf came, the Raja of Tambora came, right? So this is now in the 17th century, late 17th century, in the 1600s, and the Raja was sent here because of trouble he caused in Bima. At the time, he was still the Raja. Okay? So what happened, we see now, after Sheikh Yusuf died, the next year, Reverend Valentine visits the Cape, and he visits Sheikh Yusuf's neighbor, who is a Reverend Kelden, who was a Dutch priest preaching in South Africa in Cape Town. So when he went to visit Kelden, there he saw the grave of Sheikh Yusuf. And he mentioned in his diary, he wrote 2 books. In 1705, he writes a diary of his visit to the Cape. In 1726, after he's retired and is back in the Netherlands, he writes a book about his stay and his work and things, and then he refers to his diary and things he wrote in 1705. Both were published in 1726, his diary and his book. But what he says in his book differs from what he says in his diary. So he refers to the visit that he made in 1705 in his book, but he adds more information. So he writes that after he visited Sheikh Yusuf's grave, he went to meet he was a visitor of the governor at the Cape, and the governor invited him to his country estate. So Sheikh Yusuf was exiled in far away from central Cape Town in a farm area, and the Raja on a wine farm. So the Raja was on a wine farm and a guest of the governor, because he was not a guest, but living in the governor's estate, where he was held in exile there. And at the time that the Reverend met him, he saw the Raja writing out the Quran very neatly. He says he met the Raja's wife, he spoke to them in the Indonesian language, and but not once did they mention Sheikh Yusuf in their conversations, because the Valentine had just visited the grave of Sheikh Yusuf, and before that, and now, if it was Sheikh Yusuf, the Raja was married to Sheikh Yusuf's daughter, then there would have been something in that conversation. So my book is about this. The story goes that after the Raja arrived at the Cape, shortly after he arrived, he married Sheikh Yusuf's daughter. Now what we do know is that the Raja, after he died, his children all became murtad at the Cape. They became Christian. So if his children, if he married Sheikh Yusuf's daughter, then the Raja's children would be the grandchildren of Sheikh Yusuf. And I found that very strange, because we know the character of Sheikh Yusuf, and within one generation that all these children would convert to Christianity was very something for me to investigate. And then when I looked at this, I found there's lots of discrepancies in the passages of the letters that the Raja, the Reverend Valentine had written, because in more letters then he talks about the Raja, he mixes up the Rajas. The Raja then was the only political exile to the Cape that was re-exiled back to the Cape. He was pardoned, sent back to Indonesia, made trouble in Indonesia, sent back to the Cape, and he died at the Cape. So the Valentine, when he writes, he talks about the 2 different exiles of the Raja, and some historians who's researching on this topic have also mixed up these 2 dates, and therefore they tried to make a later visit of the Raja when he went back with his family, came back to South Africa. So they mixed up things. But when the Reverend first met the Raja, he said, I met the Raja, he was writing the Quran, I met his wife, I spoke to her, and she had followed him from Bima, which means that she had come with him to South Africa, and it couldn't have married her at the Cape. It is two things, two different things, and so therefore we can see that there is a difference in history. So this Valentine, why he was surprised to see Sheikh Yusuf's grave, it was caused him wonder because he heard about Sheikh Yusuf's death, how they captured Sheikh Yusuf, how they captured the people, and so he knew the story, but he had not met Sheikh Yusuf. So this is what we see now, that the Valentine, after he was retired, and he's now writing his book, he says, I was told that the Raja had married a dochter van Makassar from that entourage of Sheikh Yusuf. He didn't say it was Sheikh Yusuf's daughter. So that is completely different. You cannot say from this information that this is Sheikh Yusuf's daughter. So this is basically what I had written about in my book. And we can see I investigated. Then after I'd written my book, I went back to Valentine's book, and I saw many passages where he uses the word dochter. When he uses the word dochter, he talks about the mother of the dochter or the father of the dochter. Or if the daughter was if he talked about women or wives, then he said whose wife it was and things like that. And he spoke about the son of Sheikh Yusuf. So he clearly made reference to who was related to Sheikh Yusuf. But he said in his book, Ek verstaan, I was told. He didn't get this information from any valid sources, but he was told or he understood. But this is now years after he retired, he's writing this information. So therefore one has to be very careful with information that one gets in this. And unfortunately for the Raja, when he came back to the Cape, he died at the Cape. He wasn't pardoned. His wife and his children remained behind. They tried to get back to Indonesia. They couldn't get back to Indonesia. They had a tough time because economically there was no freedom of religion. And if you were Christian, you had a better chance of survival. And we can only speculate that they either converted because they really wanted to be Christian or because they converted out of necessity. That they had to convert in order to survive, because we have letters that the Raja's wife, petitions where she asked the Governor General to be sent back to to Indonesia. She said that they were in poverty, she couldn't pay rent, she couldn't. So after the Raja died, all her privileges were also gone. So when he was the Raja, she was still the Raja's wife, but when he was gone and dead, he was no longer the Raja, and she was just a burden on the VOC. So that is basically essence of my story. But now you can ask me any questions about what you want to know, and I will answer those questions, if that is okay. Terima kasih.
Thank you so much, Prof, for this valuable information. It's very good information. And great thing in Indonesia, bilang itu istimewa orang dari jauh dari South Africa came here in our country and told us about our history, Indonesian history, and one of the hero man in our history was Sheikh Yusuf. So we are thankful for her. Then she's wailing and offer all her information. If you have any question about what she's delivering to us about Sheikh Yusuf. Jadi silakan, Barbara.
Add some information. If you look at me, then you say, but are you not from India, right? So now, if you go to South Africa, Cape Town, you will see yourself there, right? Because Islam came to South Africa through the Indonesian exiles. so the first Muslims came to South Africa from Indonesia, and later they came from India, and that is how Islam, South Africa.
Ya, sure. Jadi beliau katanya bahwa beliau mungkin lihat bukan orang Indonesia, yang mungkin kira bukan beliau Indo, tapi beliau kalau kita datang ke South Africa, you will saw yourself there, akan diri sendiri bagaimana Indonesia berada di sana. Kemudian beliau katanya bahwa Islam ke South Africa delivered by Indonesian Muslim di sana. Jadi kami sekarang buka sisi pertanyaan. Kalau ada yang mau bertanya, silakan. Siapa?
We can speak Dutch. What
Dutch.
The Dutch left behind the Dutch language. So, but we know some Indonesian words. We say same words that you use. We say puasa. We change maybe the pronunciation. We say puasa, tabarang, pisang, terima kasih, you know. And the food is similar, you know. So there is a lot of similarity, the culture, the color, bright colors. They like, you know, the Cape Town people, quite different because of the Indonesian. So we can say, and I can speak Dutch, and in Afrikaans, we call it Afrikaans, which is a mixture of Arabic, and it is actually the Muslims that preserved the Dutch language in South Africa, because some of the old people, they tulis in Arabic, but if you read it, pronounce it, Afrikaans.
تفضل أستاذ عبد الله.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm an international student in Aladdin. I study science and technology. Regarding to Abu Yusuf's message, let's presume that it was correct. From 1602 till 1949, it was proven that the Dutch used so many ways and methods of torture against the people who stand against them or people who disobey the laws. So do you think in those 10 years in Sri Lanka, maybe Abu Yusuf get a lot of torture that he was forced to write this message? Because we didn't find it in his original mother tongue, we found it translated in Dutch.
Yes.
So do you think that he was tortured to confess or to write this apologizing message? And thank you.
No, one can never say anything, but I think that the Dutch knew he was a high-profile exile. They had to do anything, there would be problems also. Because after he died, the Dutch said to the Sheikh Yusuf's family, you can go home. Because Sheikh Yusuf's family here requested family to come back, and also requested his body to come back. But they were afraid. So they said, no, the wives can go back, the daughters can go back, children below the age of 5 boys can go back, but older boys cannot go back, because Sheikh Yusuf had sons with him. They knew if the son's going to go back, then the people will also cause trouble. So the wife said, no, we will stay till my whole family is coming back. I'm not leaving some of my family here. They waited another 5 years, so 20 years in exile total. 10 years Sri Lanka, South Africa was a long time. So that letter, because it's in a translation. It is not in Sheikh Yusuf's handwriting. We've never seen the original letter. And it is unlike Sheikh Yusuf, because he knows as a Sufi, where he dies, that is in his destiny, you know. So why will he now suddenly say, I'm guilty. I ask you forgiveness. Who asks forgiveness? He will only ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness, you know. So all that things in that letter makes one speculate, is this really letter? But one thing is sure, that he did not get any pardon. He was sent back Cape, further away from Indonesia, because he was still regarded as a police. But when he came to South Africa, there was no freedom of religion. He could not preach Islam. He could not practice he could practice Islam privately in with family, but there was no freedom of religion, and the punishment was death. So you couldn't just practice. And my question is, where did the Raja marry his daughter if they were isolated, separate, separate places? And the Dutch will not let the exiles mix freely, because that is a problem, right? If you're going to mix freely, unless you were isolated in the same place, because in South Africa, Nelson Mandela was exiled to Robben Island, far away, with other generals of his, but they were together, but they had no outside contact. But to come to Cape Town, where the VOC castle was, and where Sheikh Yusuf was, it would take you more than a day and a night by horse and cart. So how did they meet? And Sheikh Yusuf, and when was already in his the place where he was staying when the Raja came, So how did they meet? How did this marriage take place? Where did it take place? It's all the questions one can ask, but nobody asked questions before. They just accepted it. So now I'm asking all these questions, and it's our job as if you want to have knowledge, we must ask questions. You can't just accept things like you are saying, because when I read the letter of the general, Valentine's description of the capture of Sheikh Yusuf in Indonesia, he said, I'll say Raven gevangen, all his women were captured. It could be wives, it could be women, it could be daughters, it could be anything, but it also his friends came with, 14 people came with him, and they said that all of them are imams, But it's not true, because when I looked at the names, 5 names were women. Famida, Amida, it was women's names. So how can you say this was no females there? So it could have been, and how did the Raja did want to come home with Sheikh Yusuf's entourage, but the Dutch did not give permission. See? So there's a lot of holes in the story which doesn't add up. And when the Valentine describes how Sheikh Yusuf was captured, because the lieutenant that captured him told him one day in an inn in Japara, they were sitting and they were drinking, and he's describing how Sheikh Yusuf was captured because they foxed him. This general, Captain Van Happel, he spoke Arabic. He said the Shah, he could speak Arabic. He said, no, the Dutch are good, surrender and they will be good to you. Just surrender. But he lied to him. Then they captured him, when they knew where he was, and they cut the body.